Ljóts bið ég allar helgar kyndýr, meiri og minni mögu heimdalar. Vilt vad jag valföder vill förtälja. Fornspjöll fyra þá fremst mann. Hár var alla það rýmir byggði. Vara sannur nje sær nje svala haunni. Jörð var eigin ég upp hímin. Gott var ginnunga en grósvergi. Soltör sortna sigfollimar. Kvörv av himni heiðar stjörnur. Gæsar æmi við aldrnara. Lækrár híti við hímin sjálfan. Bræður mun berjast og bönum verðast. Månsystrångar sefjum spilla. Skölvur Yggdrasils ask standande. Ymrit aldna trän jotun lossnar. Kaurnugar mjög fyrir nýpa höndlýr. Föstur mun slítna en freki hýrinna. Fjöld veit hún freyða og framsjörg lengra. Ragnar og krömsíkt hífa ser hún uppkoma öðru sinni. Jörð og rægið grönna. Fodlar forsar flygrar nývir. Sá á fjalli Gudli sagdan någem lei. Þar skuludig var drottir byggja, och aldur daga indis njuta
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery. Welcome to GeekWatch, ladies and gentlemen. A subsidiary of the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I need to come up with a better opening crawl for GeekWatch instead of using the same one I use for the monastery. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have one of my good brothers, the CEO of Zadare Enterprises and the inventor of Zadare Spec, good old Xanatrix. How are you doing today, man?
Oh, we're doing pretty well today. I have yet another testimonial. As you'll remember last time, one of our best and brightest told us that it kept his brain in top gear. But today, we have a performer, and he says that the Zadare Spec is strong enough to make every moment your showtime. Signed off as Cirque du Soma.
I'm still shopping around. I haven't been able to find anybody who's been able to make it work, and my artistic skills are not that good. Mostly because I'm a writer.
That's entirely fine. If nothing else, I can throw a mock-up in Paint. Make it like the early thousands internet all over again.
Everything old is new again. And hell, some people use that for that weird ass vaporwave shit. Personally, if I'm gonna do a wave, I'd rather do synthwave, or laugh as I'm watching the Mexican wave at a wrestling show. Which, if you don't know, the Mexican wave is a sign that the fans are bored, so they're doing this to entertain themselves. Oh, hey, Zeltrax.
Hey.
Now, this week we're talking about comics, specifically the canon of comics, and thus we have a literal canon on screen. Also, Zeltrax, you missed the latest testimonial on Zadare Spec. But I know you brought up to me about the Power Ranger comics from Boom Studios. I was tempted to bring that into the fold for this discussion, but I decided that needs its own segment.
Okay.
Also I needed a inroad in order to have some time to do some binge reading.
Fair enough.
I read through a good chunk of the Shattered Grid story and that weird ass Justice League crossover, but I haven't read enough to be comfortable talking about it in detail. So for this week, it's I figured as a kind of inroad, because Doku is going to be eternally late this week. It would be a good time to delve into what makes a good comic. Now, we've already seen plenty of examples of what makes a bad comic. Looking at you, Liefeld.
Mm-hmm.
But I think going into what makes a good comic, whether it be superhero or otherwise, is a topic worth discussing. Now for me, I ended up getting into reading comic books thanks to a little store in Minnesota called Shinders, which sadly is no longer with us. Which I dearly miss, because Shinders was awesome to kill time at after school or work. It was also the place where I got every card game tournament player really pissed at me. When I was doing Magic tournaments, I ran sliver decks, and my whole approach was just flood the table with as many monsters as I can. So it's like, yeah, you may be able to get your really strong creatures out, but that's only one creature, and I've got 20.
Yeah, slivers are cancer for a reason.
Yeah. Then when Mirrodin came around, I had a rainbow deck where a lot of the cards that you used had greater effects determined by the number of colors used to cast.
Jesus. And come on, just be a normal cancer player like me and play blue white and tell people they can't play the game.
There's no fun in that. I'm an artist. And when it came to Yu-Gi-Oh, I ran a modified Gravekeeper deck, which
oh god.
One of them was a Gravekeeper deck, which the thing that made that particular thing annoying was the fact that it was very hard to try and defend against, because they would always find some different way to hit you. And the whole thing of making sure Necro Valley was heavily protected. So of course, with that protected, once monsters go in the graveyard, they ain't coming out unless I say so. I liken it to drunken boxing, which incidentally was why I was so dickish with Brad Wong back in DOA 3, who does drunken boxing and is very hard to predict. Of course, the other deck was a beatdown deck, which had the infamy of being able to completely wipe somebody in 15 seconds. I counted. It's mainly because it relied on high attack, low defense, and being cheap. Like, most of the monsters in that thing weren't above level 5.
First turn win decks are pretty common though, so.
Nah, at that time, everybody was doing the process. Was still doing the process of slow build to try and get their ace, where I was taking advantage of those slow build scenarios to get as many pot shots early on while everybody's starting to build their strategy.
Makes sense.
But in those places is where I first got introduced to reading comics, and where I first got introduced to reading manga, as well as manhwa, which I'm sure somebody's gonna say I mispronounced it again, but at this point I don't give a shit. But weirdly enough, when it comes to the whole Marvel DC debate, I've never been on either side of that. When it came to the comics that I was actually buying, I was buying stuff from indies. Like, I was buying stuff from Image. I was buying stuff from Dark Horse, especially since Dark Horse was starting to really kill it with their adaptions. And I was and that was also and it was also through that I found out about comics like Lady Death, which I'm still a fan of to this day. Although at the time it was medieval Lady Death, but you get the point.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to, I'd say maybe it's because I was a child of the '90s, but when it comes to comics for me, um, I always prefer the ones on the darker side of things. Not just trying to do dark for shock's sake. We've seen a whole lot of that, but the ones that we're trying to have a bit more depth of character, as opposed to still stuck in a very newspapers comic strip style. So
Yeah.
um, but for me, when it comes to the things that work, I'd say one of the main things is having a very clear vision about what you're doing. 'Cause you think about a lot of those superstar artist writers that came out around the '90s. A lot of them had a degree of control over how their comics were going to go, for better and for worse. But at the very least, you could say that there wasn't some it wasn't the fault of some editor when things went bad. And oh hey, it's Doku in the chat. Get your ass in here.
Yep.
He may not be able to get in the actual stream.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you can get in here, get in here.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I thought it would be. Doku wouldn't be able to make it via anything but the chat.
Oh well, c'est la vie. But when it comes to to comics and just sequential art as a whole, um, there is the notion of that whole keeping a unified vision and and I think that's also the reason why aside from the political problems, manga has taken over at the level that it has. Because when you're reading a certain manga, you don't have a whole lot of revolving doors when it comes to writers. I'd say now you'd be able to answer this more than I, but when it comes to the stuff that Boom has been doing, I don't think they've done a whole lot of writer shuffling
Not
over the last 3 years.
not too much, I don't think.
A part of that is probably because doing a whole lot of writer shuffling isn't a smart idea for a smaller company like Boom.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen how that happens we've seen how that writer shuffling happens with IDW, and last I checked, their comics division is still losing money.
Yeah.
Um, but when it when it comes to when it that's all. But I'd say one of the things that has kept comics alive, especially after the speculator bubble burst, was um the trade paperbacks. And when it came to manga, the there isn't real there the closest that we had to the sort of monthly approach that you'd see in regular comics was the translated versions of Shonen Jump. Beyond that, it's mostly releasing in volumes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, probably to its benefit because you're going to get a lot more out of that. But it did lead to a bit of a problem. Decompression. Now, Chuck has gone over this a bit, but it's when they try and extend a story so it can fit a page count for a trade paperback. And when it comes to that, there's definitely some stories that can make trades work. That can make trades work because you have a self-contained story with an established character. And in that regard, it's I've mentioned before about the whole thing with pulp heroes where pulp heroes are in stories, but the story isn't about them.
Mm-hmm. In pulp, the story is basically partially a character in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. The like somebody like Conan is when it comes to his particular backstory, it's not as important when you're reading one of Robert E. Howard's books as is what's going on in the present. He's just the guy who happened upon what was going on when things go to shit. And then when that's all done, he goes off to someplace else to go kill people and take their stuff. Oh, go ahead.
Wasn't saying anything.
Yeah, I thought you were for a moment. That's something, but something else that I do find interesting when it comes to the canon is how quickly the attempt to try and make characters be titles ended up backfiring hard. Because we started to see that with the whole female Thor experiment.
Mm-hmm.
That experiment was something for sure.
And I've posited this in the past, and I'd like to posit this currently. Humor me on this. Do you think that particular thing would have gone better if they announced Jane Foster is going to be wielding Mjolnir for a while?
That would have gone infinitely better if they just said Jane Foster is going to be worthy of the hammer.
Mm-hmm.
Not Jane Foster is going to be Thor. Because I'd like to point out, Beta Ray Bill was not called Thor when Beta Ray Bill got the hammer.
No. And during that whole Marvel versus DC thing, neither was Storm. Although I'd argue Storm wielding Mjolnir is a bit OP.
Yeah.
Yes, let's just make her lightning powers even more powerful.
Mm-hmm. It'd be although that brings an interesting question. What would happen if Rogue touched the Absorbing Man?
I don't know what would happen.
I think the Absorbing Man would die.
Yeah, he probably would.
I think that's one of those cases where it's like divide by zero.
Well, no, because I think with Rogue, her whole thing is less about true absorption than about draining someone of their essence.
Mm-hmm.
So, Absorbing Man, obviously, Absorbing Man would try to absorb the power from whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she would absorb his essence, and then he'd eventually die because I think they'd get stuck to each other essentially.
Which that's the kind of thing I'd expect to see out of Cronenberg's work.
Yeah, but I think after he died, he'd slough away and it'd just be her.
Pretty much.
Because absorbing man, he absorbs materials,
Mm-hmm.
and she absorbs essence. So again, it's two different types of absorption.
It's just a bit of a dumb joke on my end. But when it comes, but the other thing is now putting aside the whole seduction of the innocent thing, why do you think it would ultimately become superheroes that became synonymous with the comic book medium?
I think that partially has to do with the rise of the time in which the rise of superheroes as the comic book flagships became a thing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of superheroes came just at or after World War II. And because of that, you had this. I mean, it was almost literally propaganda against who we were fighting. With these larger than life people who could stop the bad things from happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of heroism, the ability to just stop evil. Not even with any, like, especially with something like, let's go with the most iconic Superman, who is not just the face of DC, but sometimes considered the face of comics in general. He's universally recognizable.
Mm-hmm.
Him and Batman. His whole thing was, it wasn't even really a conflict for him at the time. He just went and stopped the Nazis. He went and stopped them.
Yeah.
And that was huge for anyone during that time. That was, yes, there is this man, this absolute idealization of what we value as a society. Truth, justice, and the American way, as he used to say.
Mm-hmm.
Knocking out these terrible, evil people and bringing them to justice. And that sort of lightning in the bottle cultural zeitgeist sort of paradigm shift is probably what lent greatly to solidifying superheroes as the flagships for most comics.
Yeah. Now, something that I do find interesting when it comes to superheroes is in relation to a certain debate that I've seen in other media. Namely, this idea that you have to remain as true to a given source material as possible, but when it comes to the basest version of that, with a lot of comic book characters that are icons these days, their origins kind of suck. Has anybody ever sat down and actually read Action Comics #1 or Detective Comics #27?
A long time ago, I read a transcript of Action Comics 1.
Mm-hmm. And I know that nobody in here is gonna have read it physically, simply because those books auctioned off for $1 million each. We don't have that kind of cash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I've read through scans of both. I've seen Linkara tackle both of them. And when you compare what they would become, it kind of puts a little bit of a wrinkle in this whole thing of you need to remain true to the source material, because you see that kind of purism in other media, but In the case of Superman, if we were to do that whole true to the source material, he shouldn't be flying, for instance.
He only leaps taller than a skyscraper, runs faster than a locomotive, and is stronger than what was it? But yeah, leaps tall buildings in a single bound, I believe was the phrase.
Yeah. And as Richard Pryor would say, faster than a bowl of chitlins. By the way, if none of you have never had chitlins, consider yourself blessed.
I've avoided chitlins actively.
I was not so fortunate, as it smells.
I just think that the disgust, it's disgusting. It sounds disgusting. Like, yeah, just no, thank you.
Mm-hmm. But when it comes to that whole purism thing, that can apply with a whole lot of characters in their opening entries. Like, it would for a lot of them it would take quite a while before they'd really start establishing the identities that we're all familiar with. Um, I'd say something like Spider-Man took a little bit less time, and that's probably due to the fact that it had already been running as a comic strip for a while up to that point. But even with that, um, it's funny that no, there weren't a whole lot of people making a fuss about organic web shooters when it came to the Raimi films.
I think that might have been the recentness of I think it was Spider-Man Ultimate, in which he had organic web shooters in his wrists. Because I know that there were some of the spin-off Marvel comics, like the Ultimate Universe, where Spider-Man had some differences. Like, he didn't create the web fluid and web shooters; they were just inside him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Raimi combined that with most of the normal Spider-Man mythos for convenience's sake on Peter Parker's part.
Plus, I'd and well, when they tried going with mechanical ones for Amazing, it didn't make Amazing any better. But sometimes it ends up being the right sort of story. And what I do find interesting when it comes to the state of comics over the last few decades has been how the greatest success and the greatest hindrance has been event comics. And admittedly, this is something that I'm a bit fearful that Boom Studios may fall into the same trap. 'Cause, yeah, the Shattered Grid was a big damn deal, but the last thing that I'd want to see is event comics going into other event comics. I don't think they've gotten there yet, but they're getting a little close.
They haven't really gotten to that. They haven't really gotten to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really tough. It's a fine line at that point.
And
yeah,
I'd say the big reason why there's this kind of reliance has to do with the fact that the massive success that was Crisis on Infinite Earths.
I have that book in storage somewhere.
And the sad thing is that the sole purpose of Crisis on Infinite Earths was to clean house. It was there was too much shit that was just bloating up stories that had to be accounted for. Plus there's the fact that the writing and editing team for various comics is segregated.
Mm-hmm.
I.e., you've got a team of writers and editors for Batman. You've got a team of writers and editors for Superman. You've got a team of writers and editors for Justice League.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously they're gonna want to make sure that they have their interests in mind. So when crossovers happen, chaos ensues.
Yeah. It was also the fact that because of that segregation, you'd get multiple continuities that they could no longer just continue to retcon into each other,
Mm-hmm.
which created the whole Infinite Earths in the first place.
Yeah.
And so they just decided, let's do one giant retcon that is story based.
And to be fair, they did a very good job. That was a very good job with it. The problem is that because of how successful it ended up turning out, then there's the whole thing of, hey, can we try? Hey, how about we try this kind of thing again? It worked out last time, and ended up creating the problem that it was meant to solve.
Oh, Infinite Crisis.
Infinite Crisis has problems, but I think it's decent. The only thing is, I do think it was a missed opportunity to not have the return of the Anti-Monitor because it seemed like it was building towards that.
Oh. Then are you talking about the Flashpoint event that's led to the New 52?
Yeah, that one was. They tried to build when it came to Flashpoint. They tried to build that as this big resetting kind of event, but really most of the people you would think who would get involved in something that big aren't the focus. It is basically a bloated Flash story. Don't get me wrong, I love the Flash, but there was no reason to just not to just have this as a big crossover when that's not going to be the focus.
True.
Um,
as a side note, while the New 52 did a lot of things really, really wrong, and did some things really, really right, it's the second strongest appearance of Superman ever. First being, Golden/Silver Age, Mr. I Can Sneeze Galaxies away, excuse me.
on one hand, yes. On the other hand, there is one question that continues to baffle me when it came to the New 52. And that was who they brought in to work on the Hawk and Dove comic. They brought in the idiot.
Dear Jesus.
Those memories are sealed. Please leave them there.
But yeah, why on God's green earth would you bring back Liefeld?
Because he's a name. You've got a name. It's a name that people are going to recognize.
No.
None of that. Shame on you.
But that's exactly why they did it. Name recognition.
Yeah,
anyway,
it's a name that people remember for all the wrong damn reasons.
Still sold comics. That's all they cared about.
Not
enough, obviously, but still sold some comics. Enough for them to think that he would sell a lot, and then it didn't because everybody remembered that he was shit.
Yeah, pretty much. To which I think anybody could have warned you about that. But there's the whole whole thing. When it comes to the new 52, this is ultimately a problem with with being in these these sort of large multi-character companies is an inability to commit. Like I know a lot of people make cracks about how things got worse because of all the politics. There were that was just an accelerant. There were problems long before that, and one of the big ones was the whole editor thing. Um, where I guess because of what happened with Image, I think some companies felt that the editor needed to rein in the writers and artists. In a weird way, kind of becoming to comic books what producers became to film. Somebody who's an old dinosaur who has to be outfoxed and outwitted at every opportunity.
Executive meddling is something that you have to deal with on almost every type of creative entertainment product, though.
Mm-hmm. Although Dan DiDio can kiss my ass.
Oh yeah, Dan DiDio can fuck right off.
And a lot of people would say I'm saying that because of something like Countdown, or how for whatever reason he hated 52.
Huh?
Yeah, supposedly he would tell everybody how much he hated 52, and he thought that Countdown was going to be the better version of it. Which
Bullshit.
That's a Dewey defeats Truman kind of moment. Because, well, hopefully none of you have ever tried to read the entirety of Countdown, the build up to an event comic that had nothing to do with the subject matter.
I have not.
Celtrax, did you?
No. I stay away from bad comics.
But when it and that whole but the thing that really made me hate Dan DiDio was his response to the question of why Batwoman couldn't get married.
Oh, that bullshit.
For those of you who don't remember, he argued that superheroes are not allowed to have happy lives.
Ah, yes. The entire reason that we got superheroes aren't allowed to have happy lives because why? What's the reason for it? Did he ever expand upon that?
The closest that he got was explaining at a convention that after the whole wedding thing happens, then it's a case of then what, or that being a family person would distract from their duties as a superhero. To which I say, you can have stories about police officers and firefighters who have to balance their family duties with their jobs. So what's the difference? Like he apparently seemed to be on this idea that superheroes have to be defined by suffering, which is completely untrue. Even with the comics in his own company at the time. I mean, We talked about Superman before. He didn't have a terrible, horrible childhood. I think he's too much on that whole "my parents are dead" meme from when it comes to Batman. But
Well, and if you want evidence of people publicly disagreeing with uh, superheroes can't have happy lives, you need look no further than the competitor, Marvel, and One More Day.
how they're still feeling the scars of that and
One
because
More Day pissed off the entire Spider-Man fan base. Everybody was like, that doesn't make any sense from any of the characters' viewpoints. Aunt May would not want Peter to sacrifice his marriage to save her.
why the hell would Mephisto want that particular thing if he's you would think that he'd be more interested in somebody's soul. At the very least, if you're gonna do that kind of route, use Chekhov's gun. They tried to they I remember that they tried to justify it with One Moment in Time. It didn't take. Although I will give credit for One Moment in Time with the flashback scenes that were trying to imitate 70s style artwork. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not much, but I'll take it.
Well, and I honestly think that One More Day was more a result of them wanting to retcon that Spider-Man's secret identity had been revealed in Civil War II.
Which to be fair, and when it comes to Civil War, um, that's one of the rare. I will argue that's one of the rare cases where the MCU did it better.
Yeah, Civil War was really good. Well, the first Civil War.
I never read Civil War 2, and when I saw that they were doing the whole killing off characters for drama thing, I was like, nope. Not doing any of that.
Yeah, the sequel was bad. Also, when I said Civil War 2 earlier, I meant Civil War 1, Volume 2. Excuse me.
Ah.
I should have been more specific because his secret identity was revealed in Civil War 1, Comic 2.
Yeah. I'd say the only. That said, there was one amusing one shot I remember reading, which I still have that. I ended up getting it at Comic-Con a few years ago, where it was called Spider-Man Red, Black, White, and Red all over or something like that. And it seemed like the approach that they were gonna do is he was finally gonna make the revelation, and there was gonna be this piece in the Bugle about it. The problem is, because of how the piece was written, it backfired, and there was an "I am Spartacus" moment, which ended up pissing off Jameson.
What doesn't piss off Jameson?
Um, the fact that for a while, at one point he was Peter's he was Peter's uncle-in-law.
That's true.
Which that has gotta be 7 shades of awkward.
Just a tad, I would imagine.
To be quite honest, the whole thing of revealing the whole revealing his identity, nothing ever really came of that.
Well, I thought everything that came of it in the Civil War
back.
comic.
Mm-hmm. Welcome back.
Because the whole thing about the Civil War comic was, Cap going, yo, I saw people doing this registration thing back in the 1930s and 40s, and I know exactly what results from that. And Tony going, but we need oversight. And then Tony at the end realizing, Cap might have been a little right here.
Yeah, the problem is the way that they ended it came off like a wet fart. Especially when you're dealing with something that has no right answer. You need to treat that with a degree of care.
Which is probably one of the reasons why I like the MCU version of Civil War a little better than the comic.
Well, in that particular case, it wasn't fully about registration. It was more about it was more about Captain America's duties. It was the case of duty to his country or duty to his friend, which I'd argue is a much better story.
Oh yeah.
Oh, and I think the real issue with the way they wrote the ending of it for Civil War I was the fact that it didn't. I don't really have a good way of phrasing it. It just didn't show how much I'm sorry, I don't have a way to phrase it.
Well, what are you trying to get at? Maybe I can help you.
I think that it focused too much on what was happening with the heroes and not how the people around them were being affected by it as well. Like, there was some of that, but a lot of it was still mostly the heroes fighting the other heroes, which was the big draw of that comic run.
Plus, I think in doing the way they did it, because again, putting aside the politics of Civil War, the big problem is it was trying to present two sides when really it should have been a conflict between two groups of characters.
Yes, that too.
And when you stop and think about it, a show like My Hero Academia is almost a counter argument to the whole registration question.
Yeah.
Well, but the problem with saying that, though, is that in My Hero Academia, so many people are inheriting quirks, some sort of preternatural or supernatural ability, that the issue that you see in superhero comics in the West, which is way more civilians than superheroes, is subverted in My Hero Academia as way more people with superpowers than normies.
Yeah.
So you don't have the same issue of, I'm Spider-Man, I have all these normal people I have to worry about if anybody ever finds out who I actually am, compared to, I'm Deku, I live in a high school with a bunch of other people that have superpowers, and my mom is literally, like, has 7 or 8 different superhero offices around her apartment building. If anybody tries to get to me through her, they're going to have 50 billion superheroes on their back before they can say mommy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will admit the counter argument thing isn't as strong as I might have preferred, but I do think that there is room for potential story that kind of shows how something like registration could work without going downhill by having a neutral means of training. And it's not like there aren't several places where you could do that within either comic universe. Well, I'm pretty sure they tried to do that at least I'd say they tried to do that with Ultimate Spider-Man, but they tried to do a bunch of things with Ultimate Spider-Man and none of them stuck.
Yeah.
Well, I think the takeaway there is that the way that in Civil War that they tried to register people was an authoritarian and very over there's no oversight once it hit the government, essentially. Yeah. Whereas in My Hero Academia, the government hands out certification, but ultimately it's the heroes that are monitoring the heroes. The government keeps track and says, hey, other heroes, this hero is acting badly. Could you please go get them? And they do it. Mm-hmm. The government acknowledges that, yes, there needs to be a standard set in order for someone to act as a hero because they could hurt themselves and others. And it's much like a driver's license. Yeah. You need to show that you have some modicum of skill and responsibility in order to earn the right to use it in that fashion. And
I just realized something.
What's that?
That approach with registration in Civil War. That's almost like the approach that people who have no idea how guns work approach gun control.
I was about to make that point that the type of certifications we have for firearms in the U.S. specifically, mm-hmm. Is generally anyone can own a firearm openly. They have to buy it and register it if it's a firearm under the Firearms Act. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, they don't need anything else just to own and use it. Now, if they want to, for example, have a concealed carry weapon, they have to go through a training class to show that they are responsible and skilled enough to use it as a concealed carried weapon. And then they receive a certificate that says that they are responsible and skilled enough to do so. Now, is this whole system perfect? No. There's no such thing as a perfect system. In fact, I think there are ways that could be tweaked both in the initial stages of firearm purchase and in the stages of getting a concealed carry permit that simultaneously increase the focus on responsible ownership and decrease the barrier to entry. Because if you can increase responsible ownership, well then you've got more people who are capable of owning. And so with that respect, that's a big thing there. And you can see the same thing in My Hero Academia. They lowered barrier to heroism entry by raising the idea of responsibility and skill. Mm-hmm. They have schools that are specialized for that sort of thing. And the schools have their, inter-school rivalries and everything that schools do. And the schools are well-funded and a focus for this new superhero society that they're building.
Yeah, and in that regard, what would you say would be a better counter argument to the registration question that is in Civil War?
So the registration question in Civil War doesn't account for responsibility or skill. It's you have it, you must register.
Basically,
It's
sinners in waiting.
yeah, it's almost an rather than you are registering to say, hey, I have this thing and I am skilled enough and responsible enough to use it. You're just saying, hey, I have thing. And at that point, government goes, okay, well, you have thing, you can't use it unless we tell you to. It's a much more authoritarian viewpoint on it, and it also is a public registry. And anybody can look it up. The licensing in My Hero Academia, I don't know if it actually has a public registry. They're expected to present their licenses just like you're expected to present your license to law enforcement when you're pulled over on the highway. Mm-hmm. It's more when it comes to that licensing system in My Hero Academia, it's an assumption that if you are acting as a hero, you have it. And if you don't have it, you had better have a damn good reason to be doing so. Because they do notice that there are exceptions that if you're not being a vigilante but acting, in self-defense or defense of others while in an emergency situation, even if you have no heroism license, you can still use your quirk for whatever you're doing. It's vigilantism that they want to discourage. Mm-hmm. And so with Civil War, it wasn't voluntary. Like, they said it was voluntary, but it really wasn't. Whereas hero registration is voluntary. Not everybody has a quirk that can even enable them to be a hero, so they don't register to be a hero. Mm-hmm. And that's really the big crux of it. Voluntary versus involuntary.
And
of course,
that's why I'm curious if there was a counter argument, and if I'd say the reason why I think Hiroak is the closest to that counter argument, but obviously it's not a one for one situation.
Yeah, just due to the sheer mass of people with superpowers in that world.
But
yeah,
and of course certain other hero anime wouldn't count either. One Punch Man, One Punch Man is drugs, so that immediately is disqualified.
One Punch Man is also a deconstruction of everything about shonen anime ever, so it's kind of a moot point.
Mm-hmm. And Tiger and Bunny was a little more cynical about it.
You mean about everybody being a giant billboard?
Yeah.
I actually think that that is Tiger and Bunny. Actually, while it was cynical about it, I think it was a good point to show how if you do make heroism a thing that does fall under some sort of oversight committee, because that's why they were all sponsored. Mm-hmm. It also makes it a commercial endeavor. I mean, heroes are already a commercial endeavor, as seen by the fact that we're talking about the media in which heroes or superheroes arise, or at least one of the many media. Mm-hmm. And so it's actually just a natural step. Yeah, you have Pepsi on your bicep. So what? Now you're Pepsi Man.
It's that game sucks, by the way.
But it is one of the best memes.
I'd say the meme was made even better with that mod for Revengeance.
Now, while we're on the subject of Hiro Aka, actually, I would say that Kohei actually, in current arc, is showing how what was making the comic good is making it bad. Kohei, up until recent arcs, had been really good about letting the story develop and characters develop in a way that was organic. And I'll do it with major arc villains. So, semi-spoilers for anyone who hasn't read or watched Hiro Aka up to current arc. Especially for the stuff I'm going to talk that actually happens after the end of where the anime is. So super spoilers there. Mm-hmm. We started with Tomura, who is meant to be... Shigaraki Tomura is meant to be an analog to Deku. Has a mentor that is a super villain compared to a mentor that is a superhero. They both were raised in non-ideal fashions for each of their particular ideologies. Each of them is striving to exceed their mentor. But after the League of Villains has failed a couple times, Deku kind of moves past them. Deku is now dealing with other threats, especially after Hero Killer Stain is all done and over with. Mm-hmm. And the League of Villains is just kind of throwing Nomus out there, and they try to steal Bakugo to try and convince him to be a bad guy, and he's just like, screw you, I'm always going to be a hero. And then we have the final confrontation between, all for one and one for all, or mm-hmm. all for one and All Might, if people want to be technical, but it's really between the two quirks. Yeah.
I'm disappointed that there is not a previous holder of one for all who has gone by the name Dardigan.
We don't know that yet. We don't know the names of all of them. We only know 6, 7, 8, and 9. Mm-hmm. And technically we don't even know All for One's brother's name. He's just referred to as All for One's brother. But then we go past that. Now that big threat has been dealt with, and even though Tomura has escaped, he's kind of just neutered as a villain and has to work with the remnants of the Yakuza, the Eightfold Path of Death, or the Shie Hasaikai, as they're mm-hmm. called in Japanese, and possibly my favorite actual villain from the series, Overhaul,
aka body horror in crow form.
Yeah,
Overhaul is fucking amazing.
And it's a natural progression. Now that the threat of this, we're going to change society so that villains are in charge group is around, is now dispelled, and they have to work with, well, we're an organized crime group and we just want to profit off of everything. Both, getting rid of quirks and restoring them. And it's a progression towards something that you would expect from a society. That has developed towards incorporating superheroism everywhere. Organized crime is going to see a resurgence with the organized criminals being superpowered. You're going to see the Yakuza come up with superpowered Yakuza people. And so we have that entire arc, which was amazing because, and especially I had been looking forward to Infinite 100% in anime form since I read it on the manga almost 2 years ago. And I was like, this is going to be so good when it hits the anime. But Overhaul was a fantastic villain, way more threatening than Shigaraki ever was. Around the same threat level as All for One, but given a lot more build-up. And so you actually understood how insidious this guy really was. Mm-hmm. And in the end, Tomura, being the petulant child that Tomura is, betrays Overhaul and allows Toga and Twice to let the heroes through and stop his plan.
Mm-hmm.
And then takes the drug from him and everything else. And
also remove his hands.
Yeah, but there are plenty of people that can probably restore those for him. It's not going to keep him forever from using his quirk. Plus, think of it this way. People have had their quirks evolve in moments of crises before. He could eventually probably evolve his quirk to overhaul himself without needing to touch things with his hands.
Oh,
which
God, that makes it even more terrifying.
That'd be a case of think about that and try to sleep tonight.
Well, remember that he didn't.
Fuck, that would be a definite chance to be darkened.
Well, remember the fact that he killed Magna without actually touching Magna with his hands. Magna went to grab his arm, and his arm started breaking out in hives because he doesn't like being touched. And then he swung his arm, and Magna's top half splattered away.
Mm-hmm.
So that is evidence that his quirk was already starting to evolve. But Overhaul was gone, and then we get the UA Culture Festival, and the best anti-villain, Gentle Criminal.
Oh, Gentle Criminal, he is such a hoot.
Gentle Criminal, not really a criminal at all, just a guy who wants to leave his mark on the world because he was told he could never be a hero. And then, as a villain, he's so good at using his quirk that he can actually stand up to Deku for quite some time. He's super. Yeah. He is super, like, that quirk you don't think it'd be useful, but it's super useful.
Mm-hmm.
And so those were all natural progressions towards different aspects of how people would react in a real society. And now, past that, into the manga, so anybody who has only been watching the anime, again, heavy spoilers ahead. We are going back to the League of Villains. And I understand why. Tomura got away and is trying to rebuild himself. And I was hoping to see some evolution with Tomura. But eventually we got to Shigaraki's origin story. You know how we've gotten Origin Todoroki, Origin Bakugo, all of those ones. We get Origin Tomura, and about how he became the way he was. And it is extremely evident from the origin story and how he acts that he is a little kid having a tantrum that never stopped. He's a child and will always remain a child in his head that has never stopped. And so this whole arc was about him beating Destro and the Liberation Front so that he could have his own army and tear apart Hero Society, because that's his only goal, is to tear apart Hero Society. Nothing beyond that. It's not something you would generally see succeeding in even the darkest superhero stories of Nolan's Batman movies.
Mm-hmm.
The Joker was essentially the same. A guy who just wanted to watch the world burn. And he failed. He failed because that was his only goal. He didn't have something driving him. It was just an impulse.
When it came to him, the whole watch the world burn, I don't think that was his MO. I think his MO was to prove a point that given the right circumstances, people will always turn on each other.
And that was also proven wrong.
Yeah, because when you look at every single scheme that every single stunt that he pulled, that's what it was all about, putting people in situations to try and get them to turn on each other. The bank heist, he had the whole thing of the villains killing themselves off so that the people left alive would get a bigger share of the pie.
Yeah.
And there was the whole thing. This thing ultimately culminates with basically pulling the prisoner's dilemma with the boats.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then it was the literal prisoners who overcame the dilemma, threw the switch into the water.
Mm-hmm.
But so here's where the actual heavy spoilers come in. After Tomura beats the Liberation Front, his quirk goes through an evolution as part of that resolution. His decay quirk starts being able to be transmitted away from his body. And in doing so, he gets contacted by the doctor that was helping All for One, and he's like, "I'm going to help you become even stronger. Come to me. We're going to put you in basically a chemical-induced coma and make you the true successor to your master, to your mentor."
Mm-hmm.
And so they take him to a hospital and put him in this chemical coma where it's unexplained what they're doing to him, but that the process absolutely cannot be interrupted or he'll never wake up again. And the heroes find out about it. And the heroes find out where he is. And the heroes are like, "Oh, we can get in there. We can stop this and be rid of the League of Villains forever." And they find that out with the help of some very interesting spy work from Hawks. It was very cool. So my thought, or as I've been reading the last 20 chapters, I guess, I've been seeing where it's going. And personally, I thought Kohei was going to let Tomura lose forever. Because he's been good about letting villains go away when they're not when it's something that nobody needs to overcome anymore. The villains are part of the vehicle to show how Deku becomes the greatest hero in the world, which is what the story is all about, as said in the original opening screed.
Mm-hmm.
But Kohei has become hidebound. He absolutely wants this foil character for Deku, this person who had a supervillain mentor compared to the superhero mentor, and they're both trying to exceed them. He's so dead set on this that he has given Tomura no less than 4 Deus Ex Machinas in the last 20 chapters to keep him relevant.
In that, I think what you end up having in this case is in that particular case, what you've got is the Gul Dukat effect all over again. You had a certain character, in this case Overhaul, who did their job too well. Because if you truly wanted somebody to fill that role of this person being a ultimate foil, I would argue he fits the bill better.
He does, especially because he was, an orphan adopted by a Yakuza boss and was also trying to make a better society for his class of people. Whereas Tomura just wants to burn down society. He just wants to break everything. In fact, there's a scene in one of the recent chapters where Tomura is still in the coma, but he's having a dream where his whole family, who he is the one responsible for killing, comes back to forgive him, to try and convince him away from, being the way he is. And for a split second, you're almost like, are they really trying a heel face turn with Tomura? You almost think that Kohei might have actually found an interesting way to try and start subverting Tomura with a small Chekhov's gun there. But in the same dream, a darkness expands behind him, and out comes All for One and says, No, you're with me. And then Tomura turns to All for One, grabs his hand, decays him and his family, and says, "Fuck you all, I'm just going to break everything." He is still that tiny child throwing a tantrum, and he never grows. So instead of allowing him to grow, what does Kohei do? Just give him a bunch of superpowers. Gives him all for one. He gave Tomura all for one. The power.
I get the feeling that's what's ultimately going to undo the work.
Exactly. The work was great. Fantastic. I mean, Kohei had this marvelous story with constantly growing characters, interesting plots. Not just power. It wasn't power creep. It was more like Hunter x Hunter, where people have to find interesting and unique ways to use what they have to overcome uncertainty. And because of this, Tomura also now apparently has a homing detector to Deku. He's like, oh, you have one for all. I can feel you from any distance. Come to me, Deku. I need to take it from you to become complete. And it's the stupidest thing. And if the next chapter that comes out, because right now we've had some filler of the school and the heroes fighting Gigantomachia and some of the Liberation Front. If the next part that comes out with Tomura fighting heroes doesn't result in something bad happening to Tomura, if this Deus Ex Machina is just allowed to get away, I'm dropping the series. I can't in good conscience continue the series if he's going to ass pull his way out of this.
And the funny and I know some people will bring up the Joker when it comes to the whole. Well, the Joker is one of the most popular. Is not one of the most one of the most popular villain character in comics, and he has the whole watch the world burn attitude. Except I will argue that in the case of the Joker, the whole idea of chaos for its own sake is a very simplistic way to look at him. Because the stuff that he pulls off, it does take planning and skill to pull to try and scheme that kind of thing at that particular level. Like you're not dealing with somebody who is pure chaos. Because a big thing about him is trying to make the point that he in The Dark Knight, there was the point that he's just ahead of the curve. He's not a monster. In Joker, he's just a the whole thing of him being this mastermind just happened by accident. I.e. the because of one murder that he did, things ended up going out of hand. When it came to some of his other appearances with things like the Killing Joke and the like, it's more to show that anybody can be driven crazy with the right stimuli, i.e., one bad day.
Yep.
And the fact that he repeatedly likes bringing up the fact that his enemy is defined by tragedy. Even though he doesn't know that tragedy himself, he can figure that he's figured that out and keeps revisiting the idea of bringing tragedy to him. And that's why I think calling somebody like the Joker chaos is doing him a disservice. I'd say I was gonna say that Zaz is more chaotic, but that's not true either, because Zaz, even as crazy as he was, he had a method to his madness. In fact, his method was his madness because of his obsession with getting marks.
So what I would say is that the Joker is not chaos, and using the method to the madness idiom there he is the method of Chaos's madness. His methods, his plans, his everything all the actions he takes, all the planning he does, are the methods by which he continues to further chaos, the madness of chaos. But he doesn't do it in a way that is just for chaos's sake. He almost seems to do it in a way that is meant to inspire order to research as well. I think he's more the actual, like the comics Joker, and is more of a tool of what he may see as keeping the scales in check.
Would you say he's got more in common with Anton?
Maybe it's a hard question to answer.
Oh, well, it's definitely a hard one, especially since Anton isn't as comical as the Joker is. In fact, he's as deadpan as it gets.
Mm-hmm.
I mostly bring that up because I think more people should watch No Country for Old Men.
Yeah,
but when I argue that the kind of villain that a character like Deku needs is not a Joker, because Deku is not trying to be a Batman. Mostly because when you stop and think about it, the majority of the characters and how they're written with My Hero Aka is very much leans towards Marvel style characters. You've probably heard the adage: DC creates icons, Marvel creates characters.
Yeah.
The only person who I'd say qualifies as a DC character,
All Might.
yeah, is All Might.
He was an icon. That's just it. He was the symbol of peace.
Yeah.
So he definitely had surpassed being a character into an icon. But I think what's telling is that, again, in the opening screed for Hero Aka, Deku does not say, "This is my journey to becoming the symbol of peace." He says, "This is my journey to becoming the greatest hero." So it's a character. It's definitely a character based manga compared to an icon based manga.
Yeah. And to that end, the kind of villain that a character like that would need, especially since I'd say if you're gonna make a comic book analogy with Deku, the closest analog is Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
Is someone like him. He is better. A character like that is better if you need to have a consistent villain like that, which is honestly not something that manga has a very good track record with. You'd need something like a Luthor. You'd need some. That's the main kind of DC hero the main kind of big scale DC hero that I think would be that kind of opposite. Somebody who has just as much ambition and just as much skill, but in a different direction. That's why I say that having Overhaul's little story end as quickly as it did was a mistake. Now, having somebody like Stain's story end as quickly as it did, that was perfectly fine, because a character like Stain was always going to have a limited shelf life.
And in the end, Stain was never really a villain per se, as he was an anti-hero. he was more a Punisher type than anything. He thought that anybody who was just a hero for profit was a bad hero and was staining the name of heroism. So he had to be the one to write it.
I looked at him as kind of a representation of of a lot of characters during what some people call the Iron Age or the Dark Age. Um, Punisher is definitely the big one. Putting aside the supernatural element, maybe Ghost Rider as well. Especially since Ghost Rider's whole deal is vengeance. Um, but but the thing about a character like that is that, like, even during big crossovers with DC, it always ends up feeling awkward having Superman act opposite the Joker.
Yeah,
because the putting aside the power difference, obviously the two of them aren't thematic opposites.
exactly.
And if you're gonna do the whole hero needing a villain, you need that thematic opposite. That's why even though they keep trying to do the whole try again thing, the reason why Venom worked so well was because of how personal that particular relationship was.
Yeah, it was also a Venom specific. The Venom thing specifically, even before Venom and the symbiote met Eddie Brock. The reason Venom was the symbiote type of storyline was so good was it showed that there are darker impulses to the heroes in comics, and that with a little bit of a shift, it'd be very easy for some heroes to abuse their power. And a symbiote that increases aggressive and antisocial behavior, essentially, definitely illustrates that. And it shows, oh yeah, given a few different impulses, all of a sudden this character is no longer the nice guy hero that he would be, but he becomes a little bit more of an asshole. Or in Peter's case, a lot of it more of an asshole.
Yeah, and I know some people like to make fun of the whole dancing Peter, including myself, quoting it as
Sam Raimi's dark emo Peter.
Although this is one of the rare cases where I think Movie Bob actually had a point.
Oh God, why are we mentioning Movie Blob?
Because I have to give the devil its due. Because he argued that when it came to those particular scenes, it's basically a nerd doing what he thinks is quote unquote cool. It's now granted, it's one of those things that doesn't quite hold up on closer inspection, but it can to a certain extent. Just probably not the. But then again, since we're dealing with somebody who thought that cosplaying as Captain N for his own little fanfic was cool, probably not the best point of comparison.
So you're saying that he lacked self-awareness when making that statement?
All I'm saying is that I spit in the face of people who don't want to be cool.
Okay.
And nobody can. And as far as the question of whether or not I can say something like that, given how much of a giant fucking nerd I am, I'm in Minnesota. I live cool half of the damn year.
That's a bad joke. You should really feel bad for it.
I don't.
You should, though.
Well, I don't.
No shame. No shame.
Yeah?
No. I think what we can boil down from all of this conversation, though, about what makes comics in general good, though, what versus what makes them bad. It's parts of it are going to be a little bit subjective.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just nobody's going to like the same comics all the time. But even if they don't like the comic, they can look at comics they don't like and still go, yeah, that's a good comic. It's well made or otherwise well put together. And it's a multitude of things that don't always necessarily all have to be in the same work either. You can have a very chintzy and rote story in a manga or in a comic that is, it's something filled with familiar tropes and cliches. The story is nothing to write home about, but because of the way it's presented through the artwork, it can be really good.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side of that, you can have something like the original One Punch Man, as in the original webcomic. The art there is, I'm going to put it this way, one's art is very rough. If you look at the original Mob Psycho 100, it's very rough. All of it, very rough artwork. But then he's got this way of putting the action together in the rough artwork that makes it flow well. And the stories are great. One Punch Man as a deconstruction of the power creep that you see in every shonen anime ever is hilarious. It's a good comedic tool, and he still manages to keep a serious thread of overarching story through it. And it's or Mob Psycho 100, which is essentially shonen battle anime meets slice of life.
That and the fact that you've got somebody who is overpowered as fuck, but
just wants to be normal.
Yeah.
That's why the slice of life part comes in. He just wants to be with the girl he likes, be successful in school, and like who he is. And he's the most powerful psychic on the face of Earth, and has all these super awesome powers that any other kid would kill to have, including his brother.
Which, of course, makes things a bit amusing when he ends up getting his own powers himself.
Yep. It's all about whether the elements mesh, I think is the best way to put it. Each element could be distilled to its most perfect form. But if you put all the elements together and they don't mesh, it's going to be a bad comic. You could have the best written story in the world with the most magnificent art. And if they don't mesh, it's done. It's not going to be successful.
That is a fair point to make. In that regard, you could say that these. First off, there is the philosophy that I've espoused for the past I'd say 25 years of holism, i.e., looking at the entirety of a work instead of just looking at pieces of it.
And using that idea, in most cases of entertainment medium in general, and comics in specific, they are all gestalt, more than the sum of their parts. You look at the whole, the work as a whole, and the parts that go into it, and it all adds up to something more. And so whether you could have weaker aspects, and they're elevated by the stronger aspects and mesh and then it all becomes a cohesive and coherent whole comic, whole manga that is just a treat to consume as entertainment media go.
Mm-hmm. And I think where it ends up going wrong is when that balance is disturbed, or when you have when you have people who are more concerned with their individual part than contributing as a whole.
Using the My Hero Aka recent stuff, and no, I'm not going to repeat it, so no spoilers. But it's definitely one facet is being emphasized to the detriment of the others.
Yeah, I think a non-spoilery version that I can use for this kind of thing would be Final Crisis.
Oh God.
Now, I want to make clear, I don't hate Grant Morrison, and he does put out good work. The problem is he has a bit of a habit of getting lost in his own head.
Yeah.
Yes.
And because of that, his version, he ends up having a altered state of reality when it comes to what he's writing about. Which is why something like Final Crisis ended up being so goddamn weird. It's not that doesn't mean bad, just I still don't know what to make of it. even after all these years, I can't say it's absolute shit. There's definitely some questionable elements like that whole thing with the gun. But I can't say that it's not that it's like I'm reading something in a language I don't understand. I guess that's the best way I'll put it.
It's all Greek to you. As the old idiom goes.
Mm-hmm.
No, and that's an entirely different issue where all of a sudden you're not seeing it through the lens of a general reader, but it's definitely moved to the actual artist's lens.
Mm-hmm. And well, it's understandable to a certain extent because you are going to be putting a bit of yourself in art, given how invested you have to be in order to do it.
Yeah.
There comes a point when you're not writing for an audience, you're writing for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think Morrison falls into that trap in his bad works. It's one of those cases with when he's good, he's pretty good, but when he's bad, he's really bad. There's not really a middle ground.
Well, at least that means he hits the extremes.
For better and for worse. But
yep.
I think that's a good wrapping point for it. I'm sorry that this particular episode of GeekWatch was a little shorter than the rest. There will probably be a longer one, given that we will be hopefully doing the world building roundtable experiment next week. And I will be putting up a bit of a framework for how that's going to work. As well as creating the map. Now,
nice.
As far as what's coming down for the rest of this week, and keep in mind all this is subject to change. Tomorrow we have two things. First, tomorrow afternoon, I will be beginning the stream of Ghost of Tsushima. Now, as far as what kind of build that I'm going to be doing, I mentioned before, I will be playing it by ear.
Which is honestly the best way to play it.
if I do
I
a
constantly switch my kit.
second run, maybe I'll try for another play style, but I need to have a general idea about what's expected of me first before I jump into that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Let's see. So I'll probably stream it again on Tuesday, as well as on Wednesday, because I don't have interviews for those days. Thursday, Ed Jowett is coming back, so I'll have an opportunity to talk about Era Zone as well as my experiences with Era Lost Legend with him. On Friday, I may have an as far as in lengths, the I don't have a set time frame of beginning and end when it comes to it. It's just a case of I'm gonna go for as far as I feel like each session, and then stop when I feel a natural break. On Friday, unless something changes, I will be having James E. Jackson on the show, who runs a professional GM service. So I'll have an opportunity to talk with him about that. Saturday is going to be the Big Dice panel, which is I'm going to have a bunch of people who have worked third party on D&D 5th edition and give their experiences. And of course, on Saturday at 5, there's going to be the Monastery Gazette. And actually, I'm making a bit of an audible when it comes to that. We are instead of 5 p.m. Central, I'm moving Monastery Gazette to 6 p.m.
Huh.
So I'm doing it a bit later, mostly so I can have Xana on consistently with it.
6 Central, Homer.
Homer,
So
at this point, you should be used to dealing with big ass time gaps. And I'm pretty sure it's Monday over there by now. Also, this is the reason why I have World Time Buddy bookmarked. It makes coordinating time zones a hell of a lot easier.
Yep.
Sunday is also going to be a doubleheader because at 2 I'll be having Paul Catt to talk about his game, and of course at 9:30 at 9:30 or after it, depending on how things go, I will be doing the little experiment that I hinted at earlier. And just as a reminder, as I mentioned previously, the days between the 28th and the 31st, I will be out of town. So those days there will not be any streaming.
He's finally taking a vacation, people. Let him take it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You all said I should take a vacation before I work myself to death. Well, now I am. But
Homer's wondering where you're going.
Oh, out of town. That's where. Let's leave it at that.
No man's land. I like that.
I'm not going to Hello Games' studio. What are you talking about?
That's a bad No Man's Sky joke, but I liked it anyway.
I don't know where Boracay is.
It's an island in the Philippines.
I'm sure it is. It is. It's one of those things where I don't get the joke.
It's a very tiny 7-kilometer long, 1-kilometer wide island with a population of 32,000 people. And I think it's a vacation destination.
Okay.
Yeah, as far as
it's the top tourist area in the Philippines.
all I can think of is if I go over there, I'll just be surrounded by people shorter than me. Although that's a moot point because I'm always surrounded by people shorter than me.
If we ever meet, you'll actually have someone taller than you, Monk.
How tall are you?
6'5".
No, you won't. You're 1 inch short. Nice try.
It's a good thing I'm slouching all the time. I haven't stood up straight in probably 2 years.
Yep.
Should do that.
But of course there will be plenty of more madness and plenty of more surprises, as you guys have probably also seen. Each Saturday for the month of August, I will be covering a different RPG that had the Lord of the Rings license, starting with the Iron Crown days and going all the way up to the Cubicle 7 era. So that's something to look forward to, especially since it'll technically be my 100th review.
Nice.
That's going to be a nice review.
Mm-hmm. Let's just hope I don't get my ass kicked by purists again.
Fuck the purists. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. And of course, but with that said, I want to sincerely thank everybody for taking the time to enjoy the madness. We'll be back next week with more madness as we always are. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.